Hello, and welcome to Candid Conversations with Dr. Kelsey. I'm your host, Dr. Kelsey, and this is the space where I share my honest thoughts, real experiences, and the no BS conversations I wish more people were having about movement, training, injury recovery, and life as an active human. The goal of this podcast is to help you better understand your body, think more critically about rehab and fitness, and feel more confident making decisions so you can stay active long term. Before we start, a quick reminder. I am a physical therapist, but I am not your physical therapist. Nothing here is medical advice. So if you're dealing with something specific, please reach out to your PT or schedule a session to work with me. All right, now let's get into today's conversation. About 3 months ago, I started really focusing on SEO for my business with help from Lex Lancaster. This was after I joined the Lextromind mentorship program that she runs with her partner, Shantae Cofield. So the thing with SEO is that it takes months to see the fruits of your labor. Lex is really upfront about it, and she showed us multiple examples of the quote unquote behind the scenes, if you will, of SEO success stories where the results that these people had came after months of work and just patience, essentially. So I acknowledged this, and I acknowledged that it would take time for this to pay off in the long run. So fast forward to now, where a few days ago I was starting to, a few weeks ago, I started getting really worried about not seeing results, and I started getting really frustrated that some of the new service pages that I made for my website were still not being indexed by Google, meaning those pages that I'd spent so much time on aren't even being shown on search results. And so I started to wonder if there was something else I could be doing, or maybe I was doing something wrong. And then I had a meeting with Lex the other day, and she reminded me that it's literally only been 3 months. She had, I don't want to say she promised, but I mean, she was pretty clear that this stuff, sometimes it takes 6 months at the minimum to really see things take off. And again, it's only been halfway to that 6-month part. And she reminded me, or she showed me that there is evidence that my website is gaining traction. It's just going to take more time to really see the fruits of my labor that I'm doing right now. And, whatever I'm experiencing, or the stuff that my website is experiencing at this point in my journey is all very, very normal. I'm not doing anything wrong. So again, it, even because I live with doing the website, my business, I live with that every single day. And so it had felt like I had been doing this for forever. But when she pointed out that it's only been 3 months, I realized that I sounded exactly like what some of my rehab clients sound like to me. So as a physical therapist, I've helped hundreds of people recover from injuries and surgeries, and some cases do take upwards of 6 months to rehab, especially things that involve the tendon. I've done a podcast episode on this before. And even though I'm able to see the gradual progress being made, a lot of the clients going through the process might not feel the same way. So today I wanted to talk about the messy middle of rehab, which is the part where you feel like you've done all this work already, but you still aren't where you want to be yet. So I'll talk about a former client who was in the same place in their rehab that I am now with my SEO, but who decided to quit instead, a friend who couldn't imagine getting back to where they were before, after getting surgery and doing rehab, but who did eventually make it after trusting the process, and what my experience with working on my SEO has taught me about the uncertainty felt and patience required by those going through rehab. So a couple of years ago, I had a client with an Achilles tendon issue, and before coming to me, they dealt with that issue for about a year. And even before it flared up that year prior, even before then, it was something that they had been experiencing on and off for several years. The only difference between what they had experienced before and what they came to me for was that their issue would go away on its own, basically. But now they'd been dealing with this flare-up for like a whole year. So, it didn't just go away on its own. So like Lex, I was pretty upfront that tendon issues do take several months to get better. And especially the longer you wait to address them, the longer it's going to take to rehab. So I gave them an estimate of about 6 months minimum to be able to return to jogging comfortably again. And, they acknowledged it, like, we're, I guess, relatively excited to start. But just like me with my SEO, at about the 2-month mark, they started expressing frustration that they still couldn't run without pain. And so, I reminded them, like, yes, I understand, still can't run, but, lunges used to bother you before, and now you can do lunges without pain. So that shows progress. It's not like you're stuck to where you were before, or like stuck where you were like when you first started. Like, you're making some progress, but I understand that, like, it's frustrating you're not able to run yet, but that's usually doesn't come about until the 6-month mark. So I did my best to reassure them, but at the 3-month check-in, they ultimately decided not to continue with rehab. And so getting through the messy middle, so they were in the messy middle, and getting through that is probably the most difficult part of rehab, because you're past that initial stage of excitement of starting something new and, like, doing something to progress towards your goals. But you still have quite a bit to go to get to where you want to be. You've essentially built the foundation of your rehab and are now giving it time to pay off. And for someone living through it, they see themselves, they're with themselves all the time, obviously. And so it can seem like nothing's happening because they're still dealing with the pain, or they still, like, can't do certain things. They still have to modify things. But from the outside, so, like, from my perspective, small changes and steps towards progress are a lot more obvious. So, like with my previous client, they were super fixated on the fact that they still couldn't run, versus on the outside, I could see their progress because I was like, okay, before you couldn't do this without pain, but now you can do this pain-free. Before you couldn't do this exercise, but now we've progressed to a more difficult exercise. And obviously, looking back, like, the messy middle is often where the most important work happens. So it's like, once you get over that hump, like, everything after that is a lot easier. But when you're in the middle of it, when you're in the thick of it, like, you just feel like you're stuck. Like, you don't really see, you can't see over the crest, I guess, is the best way to describe it. And a friend of mine recently experienced this. So they just recovered after an injury that led to a surgery. But again, after the first few weeks of their rehab journey, they genuinely couldn't picture themselves getting back to where they were before. So that was their goal. But, like, to them, it seemed like every single milestone they achieved, like, would turn up new challenges. So, for example, when they were finally cleared to walk without a boot, they realized, oh, like, I can't walk normally. So they had to relearn how to walk normally again. So it's like every time they reached a goal or a milestone, like, something else would come up. So then it just seemed like their progress was going in a straight line instead of, like, up on a diagonal towards their goals. And they stuck with it, though. So they just kept at it. I mean, it's not like they were, like, super excited about it, but, they kept with it. And eventually, just one day, they just kind of had an aha moment where all the rehab work that they'd done, like, kind of finally clicked. And then they were able to see, like, the finish line. They were able to, like, see, like, oh, like, I'm able to do all this stuff now. And then, like, my goals are over here. Like, there's not much left to be able to reach my goals. And so now they're back at the gym, kicking everyone's butt. even though they're not quite at the level they were before, but they're definitely close enough that it seems a lot more doable. And so when it comes to rehab, it's really important to remember to look at how far you've come versus how far you still have to go. Because I feel like people get really, really fixated on the end goal. And I mean, it's important to keep sight of your goals, but then it becomes frustrating because every step closer you get, like, it still seems so far away versus just, looking back, turning around and seeing, hey, I used to be all the way over here and now I'm at this point. And also a reminder that highlight reels on social media don't usually tell the full story. And even if they do talk about like the messy middle a little bit, I feel like it's only touched on a little, or maybe the people seeing it, including myself, like the people watching it don't realize fully or don't appreciate fully like how difficult and how long the messy middle is, because it's boring. Such a huge part of the process is so boring and repetitive. And so who wants to watch that on social media? So a lot of times those highlight reels will show the beginning. Obviously, they're going to show like where they started and maybe like some of the initial excitement or whatever, kind of, briefly show the middle part, like gloss over it, and then show the end, like, yay, we did it. And so I think that kind of turns into an expectation for us that like, hey, yeah, it's, we're going to do this thing. It's going to take probably not that long. Or even if like for me with SEO, even if we acknowledge like, yeah, it's going to take a few months, like a few months feels like forever. And then, so then we just kind of get stuck in this little trap, so to speak. So with rehab and with other things, so like in my case, SEO, it's important to not only to like remember to look at where you've come from, but also to zoom out and look at the big picture. Because we get stuck at looking at the little details because we live with it every single day. And so if you're able to kind of take a step back and try to look at things from a different perspective, you might find that you're actually making a lot more progress than you thought you were. But one thing I want to be careful about is that, I don't want people to think that they need to keep doing the same thing indefinitely, because there are times when like you might be doing something that's not helping you. An example of this are two other previous clients I've had. They actually came independently, but they came from the same clinic where they realized they were doing the same thing over and over again, and there was no end in sight. Literally, like, there was no, like, time. They were not given a timeline, so they didn't really know where the end would be. And so they came to me, and then, they were able to get better after like 4 weeks. But so there is a difference between being stuck in the messy middle of a successful plan, or just being stuck in the messy middle of like some sort of plan, and just being stuck. And so, how do you tell the difference? Like, it's kind of 2020, hindsight is 2020, but if you're in the thick of it, it's really hard to tell the difference. But there are some subtle things that you can look for to help you. So when it comes to rehab has a fairly predictable timeline. So most things are going to take about 3 months, like 6 weeks to 3 months to get better. And again, like I mentioned, for tendinopathies, that time frame is usually like more like 6 months. And it's the same thing with surgery. So after you get surgery, like most things are going to take like 12 weeks to be able to go back to like normal day-to-day stuff. Like, so if you have a desk job, like that would be for you. If someone is more active, so like most of my clients, they want to get back to a sport. They want to get back to like CrossFit or, triathlon, high rocks. That's going to take a little bit longer, just depending on the surgery, 6 months or longer, just to get back to like that same level that they were before. That's after surgeries. But it's, it's pretty predictable, the timeline. And of course, there are going to be some deviations and exceptions. Like some people are going to recover a little bit faster. Some people are going to have some setbacks. And so, but even with those deviations, it either shortens or prolongs the timeline in a predictable manner. And so that's why like I'm able to still give like some sort of timeline. Like I'm even though I might not be 100% sure if, like, going back to my client, I wasn't 100% sure he'd be able to get back to running at 6 months versus 5 months or even 7 months. But I was, 90% sure that it would be around the 6-month mark where he would at least be able to do some jogging with way less pain than he was experiencing right now at the beginning. And so with that, like, if someone is going to promise anything or guarantee that, I never like to give 100% guarantees because I don't think anything is 100% guaranteed in life. That's why I'm usually like 95% or whatever. So if someone is going to tell you how long something is going to take, they should be able to estimate based on like their past experiences or even on like the experiences of other people. So for me, like my rehab timeline, or my prognosis, my ability to, estimate prognoses came from obviously my experience, but then also just from the literature and from other people's experiences, like, and reading protocols and things like that. So it's like a culmination of all of this information. So firstly, there should be some sort of timeline, and it shouldn't be based, like for physical therapy, it shouldn't just be based on like your referral. Because I know a lot of people will have referrals from a physician that says like, oh, like, this referral says 2 to 3 weeks for 6 weeks. 2 to 3 times a week for 6 weeks. And so in their brains, they think that they'll be better in 6 weeks, which, to be fair, like, the 6-week mark is usually kind of like that mark that's actually like right past the messy middle. So it's right after that hump where you're like, oh, I made progress and like I'm almost back to normal. But some people might need more time. Some people don't need 6 weeks. But I've known several physical therapists, and I've heard from clients from when they went to other physical therapists that they've been told like, oh yeah, just do this thing for 6 weeks. And so they think that 6 weeks is like the automatic cutoff or something. So the timeline shouldn't just depend on the referral. It should depend on like the assessment basically, and the physical therapist's like prognosis, which is based on the assessment. So that's the first thing. Another thing to think about when trying to decide if like, oh, I'm just in the messy middle versus being stuck, is looking at asking yourself if there has been progress. And again, sometimes it's really difficult to notice if there's been any progress, especially if you're like just looking at the end goal and realizing that you're not there yet. But, remember that sometimes you need to zoom out. Sometimes you need to turn around and see where you were before. And also asking the physical therapist and saying, hey, do you see progress? Like what are the things that you're measuring that you see progress on? Like, do I have more range of motion? Am I able to do things like, am I able to do more things before the pain flares up or whatever? So, making sure that there is progress, because if absolutely zero progress is happening, then you might want to consider like, hey, maybe I should I be doing something else? And then lastly is whether the plan is progressing appropriately. Because if the plan's not progressing, if you're not being appropriately challenged, of course there's not going to be progress, because there's nothing challenging you to initiate that progress. There is an exception, but there are very, very, for certain exercises that seem easy, but are actually doing something. And in my experience, it's going to be something like a joint mobilization. So I had another client that I was seeing for their toe, and I had them doing like a joint mobilization of their big toe, and they, I mean, we were doing some other stuff too, but they told me like, it feels like I'm not doing anything. I'm like, I promise, I know I told you, like, if something feels like it's not doing anything, like, I'll change it, I'll progress it. But for this one exercise though, just this singular exercise, I promise, like, stick with it for at least a couple more days, like a couple more weeks. And then from there, we'll see if it didn't do anything. And then, yeah, after like another week, she's like, oh yeah, like my toe feels better. So that's like, so something like a joint mobilization thing, like that's the only exception that I've seen. But in terms of like exercise, like normal exercises, like, yeah, they should be challenging, because if it feels like nothing's happening, even for stretches, if it feels like nothing's happening, they're likely it's not really doing anything, and you're kind of wasting your time doing that exercise. So if you're stuck in the messy middle and you're trying to decide if, you're in the messy middle versus just being stuck and needing to do something else, like looking at, do you have like a time frame, and, is the time frame based on your assessment versus just based on like some arbitrary 6 weeks? Has there been progress, and is your plan progressing appropriately, or is there a plan? Like, is there an explanation for where you are besides just, oh yeah, just trust the process? Because yeah, you do need to trust the process, but there has to be a reason to trust, if that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, like, remember that real progress is rarely as dramatic as social media makes it out to be. And my experience being in the messy middle of improving my SEO makes me appreciate what my clients and others are going through during physical therapy so much more. I mean, I've gone through physical therapy before as well, but I feel like I think those processes were like 3 months or less. So that's why, like, I feel like I've never experienced something this long before, where I'm like, I don't know if I'm going in the right direction. But yeah, so if you're going through physical therapy right now and are stuck in the messy middle, remember to zoom out so that you can see the progress that you've made so far, and, trust the process. Like, I gave you the exceptions, the framework, but, if you're making some progress, you've been given a timeline, and things are like your exercises, your plan is like progressing, then unfortunately, you might just need to hunker down, trust the process, keep grinding, and then you'll also feel that aha moment where like everything clicks. Because you never know how close you might be to reaching your goal. So you don't want to give up, so to speak, too early after doing all of this work. So I know it's a fine line, but yeah. So thank you for listening. If you liked this episode and know someone in the messy middle of their own rehab journey, send them this episode hopefully for motivation to be able to trust the process so that they can reach their goals in a more timely manner. Otherwise, I will see you in the next conversation.